It's unlikely you see code in black and white, and I mean that literally. A developer uses syntax highlighting to visually differentiate portions of her code. But these signifiers between different kinds of content aren't something that we interpret consciously. They're typographic cues that add to the conventions of the programming language. You, the developer, are reading and skimming code, and how effectively you're able to do this is actually informed by many of the same principles that determine how effectively you can read anything else. Syntax highlighting is designed, and its success is informed, at least in part, by the typography. Just like with any other discipline-specific typography, there are some details that are unique to the subject matter, but many are generally applicable as well. And because of this, typographic conventions in syntax highlighting can teach us about using type in many other situations, designing longer form articles, visual identities, user interface design, and other things entirely. When syntax highlighting is successful, we don't stop to appreciate it, and this is a good thing, but it's something I'd like us to dedicate some time and attention to today. Our work uses type extensively, and you probably know more about how to apply some advanced typographic features than you realize, directly through your familiarity with typographic conventions in code. Syntax highlighting creates a visual hierarchy, and just as they do in graphic design, Gestalt principles help explain how you interpret the code you're reading. Similarity through color is what we think of when we think of syntax highlighting typically. The syntax is categorized for you with different hues. It helps you immediately associate pieces of code, know that they're similar or dissimilar. But this is just one way of how pieces of syntax are highlighted and how typographic principles are used within code. Various graphic design instructors have reminded me over the years, if it's the same, make it the same. And if it's different, make it different. Color is far from the only method we have to associate and disassociate things visually. Type style, typeface weight, and background color are a few that we see in our code editors. For example, you might use bolding to create sort of a headline for a class name. Or you might use a background color, or you might have a background color applied when you type something incorrectly. And this is always faster than running tests to catch your typos, so I guess this qualifies as a talk on testing now. But syntax highlighting, there isn't a single correct way to do things. There's conventions, and they can be followed, ignored, or intentionally broken. And I think comments are one of my favorite examples of this. How they're designed can place them anywhere in the hierarchy of a document or your code editor. They can be subtle, encouraging you to focus on the code, or they can be the most prominent piece of your text editor, demanding to be read. Here they are, side by side, the same piece of CSS, but they have a very different visual hierarchy. Continuity and symmetry are some other principles that apply when we're thinking about how syntax highlighting is designed, particularly for when we're writing code. Aligning alike elements and other contextual features can help you keep your place while writing code. One bracket might be highlighted when you select a different one, and so the two are matched. Or if you're writing a white space significant language or using a white space significant preprocessor, you might have white space characters shown, or rules or lines appear to guide your eye vertically. And by maintaining the same syntax highlighting theme for an extended period of time, you might actually find your code easier to read. Certainly, familiarity influences our perception of code. We become accustomed to our own theme and settings. When speaking about typefaces themselves, type designer Zuzana Lichko said, "Readers read best what they read most." And this has more to do explaining why blackletter and older books look challenging to read to us today, but was once the norm. But on a much smaller level, I think it also is true for code. Familiarity influences our perception of code when it's displayed elsewhere, too. Consider these two pieces of documentation. Both are familiar, but for very different reasons. On a first glance, which are you more likely to trust? One common graphic design tool that is noticeably absent from this list is size. Size can very clearly establish a visual hierarchy, and this is something we do in typography, in book typography, and on the web, of course, through a type scale. But within our code editors, most of us would find it pretty strange if different pieces of code were different type sizes. Monospace typefaces lose a lot of their benefit for us if we start changing the size of things at different points. And this is why I think syntax highlighting is a particularly interesting way to look at some other advanced typographic features. Syntax highlighting cues developers on what they're about to read without ever involving type size. And your familiarity with typographic principles within code means you already know how to communicate these sorts of things within other kinds of text as well. This is useful because whatever kind of project you're working on, it involves syntax highlighting beyond code. Code doesn't have an exclusive license on this. Color and other forms of visual emphasis have long been used within written and typographic communication. Showing relationships within writing is relevant to all kinds of texts. And a prevalent form of something you could call syntax highlighting on the web is link text. The distinct blue hyperlink signifies that this text is different from the rest around it. These words are different, it says. You can interact with them. And color has long been used to emphasize content. And this is a reproduction of an Erhard Ratdoit page from the 15th century, where color is used in line for emphasis. What about the beginning and the end of a sentence? Period or other punctuation hasn't always been used to show this. Even our idea of the paragraph wasn't always around, the idea of using space to separate ideas visually. Jumping way, way ahead, even the idea of a type family that can work in tandem is still relatively new. This is the typeface Univers designed by Adrian Frutiger, a multi-axis typeface system with different styles for weights and widths. And its design is inspired by the periodic table, which includes how it's presented to other designers. Type designer Peter Bielak said, "Thanks to Frutiger, it is now common practice to produce a dozen or more styles when working on a new type family." And you can see that in his own typeface, Greta. This is just Greta Sans. There's also a serif and a monospaced version. So this is a way of working for type designers now, but that's even true for someone who's much, much newer to type design like me. I'm working with the application Superpolator here, and I've designed 3 master styles, and I can interpolate and generate the other ideas, the other potential styles in between. This kind of power is actually moving even closer to designers working on the web with variable fonts, which I'm not going to really cover in this talk, but it means that the tools we have around us to distinguish content for readers will continue to be in transition. In addition to a variety of styles, many comprehensive contemporary typefaces also include advanced typographic features that allow us to suggest different kinds of content or make things more subtle for our readers in specific situations. These advanced typographic features have been included and improved within fonts for many years and are now viable to use on the web. They're called OpenType features. And just as we differentiate content using bold, italic anchors and other visual cues, we can signify different kinds of content using these advanced typographic features to our readers using CSS. So one you might already be familiar with is ligatures, which in OpenType is also abbreviated to liga. And you might think of ligatures as a beautiful way to connect 2 letters, and that's true, but often the real goal is to resolve a spacing issue within the typeface. Here, the F and the dot of the I are too close together, especially when used at small sizes, and a ligature can be a functional and beautiful way to resolve that spacing issue. But as type designer James T. Edmondson has said, sometimes you need a ligature, and sometimes you need an F that can just chill the F out. In his thesis typeface Kovic, you can see here in the regular version that there are some collisions happening, and in the italics. And one way to resolve these would be a more traditional idea of a ligature where these things connect. But he actually, oh, here you go. So that's highlighted. But he actually designed the ligatures in the regular version so the flag of the F and the dot of the I are moved closer or further apart, and the F and the L don't collide anymore. And then in the italic version, which is more influenced by brush lettering, he did a more traditional ligature where those things connect. So these spacing issues can be solved through the OpenType ligatures feature in a variety of different ways in a typeface. And you can enable this in the fonts you're already using in your CSS using the font variant ligatures property and setting it to common ligatures. But this is really the best case scenario CSS. Font variant ligatures is a lower level property. You can think of it kind of like margin bottom, where we only set one direction of the margin at once. And then the higher level version of that is margin, where we can set all 4 directions at once. The higher level property for font variant ligatures is font feature settings. And this lets us set multiple OpenType features at once. So that's where that liga abbreviation comes into play. So here we're saying font feature settings, we'll use ligatures. But that actually, the problem with this, even though it has better browser support, is it breaks the cascade. If I later want to set a headline and define different OpenType features, I'm going to have to redeclare everything I've set on the body, which is really inconvenient. But as Rachel said like 5 minutes ago, anything new in CSS, you can use feature queries to detect support. So we already had a really nice setup for feature queries in the last talk, but I'm actually using supports not here, so this is sort of an inversion of those feature queries. If font variant ligatures aren't supported, then we'll use font feature settings. Otherwise, we can use font variant ligatures. Now, this is kind of confusing, and we're only on the first OpenType feature, so I can understand if you're saying, I am not going to do all that just to get ligatures. Fair enough. I put together a little library for you called utility OpenType, which takes all these advanced typographic features I'm going to be talking about and assigns them to those to a single class name, those 4-letter OpenType feature abbreviations. So you can install it through npm, link to the CSS file, whatever build process you're using, and then you'll have easy access to these features without having to write those feature queries. So to look at another application of that, ligatures should really be on by default in the browser, but one that won't be is discretionary ligatures. They're ligatures that are applied at your discretion. Here, in this typeface clinic slab, there's an ST and a TH ligature, which you probably wouldn't want on through the entirety of the body copy in your text, but you might want it in a beautiful headline setting. So you could use font variant ligatures, and instead of common ligatures, you could say discretionary ligatures. Or for better browser support, you could write that kind of complicated supports query, or at least hard to remember. Or you can use my utility OpenType library if you want and apply the dlig class name. And then you'll have discretionary ligatures in your headlines, or wherever you choose to apply them. Another really interesting feature is contextual alternates. This is Lavanderia, a typeface available through the Lost Type Co-op. It's lettering typeface, or a typeface inspired by lettering. So there are features included that make it feel more like true lettering done by hand and not a font. To take advantage of these features, if you take advantage of these features, the typeface will be more script-like. In this case, an A at the end of a word or phrase can get a flourish, and there's many other features like that. Another one of my favorites is in this typeface Enemy by Shiva Nalaparamal. It's a stencil typeface, but when you zoom in and look closer, you can see that the O's and the K's and the E's aren't actually the same. There's been different versions of the glyph design, so when they sit alongside each other, it feels more like an organic stencil and less like a repeating font. So you can use this in your CSS with font variant ligatures contextual or the CAlt class in my library. Now, we're halfway through the second talk today, and no one's talked about emoji yet, so I'm happy to be the first person to mention emojis at this conference. This is an emoji icon set thing I designed for SAD magazine, a magazine in Vancouver. This is for their secrets-themed issue. So this is what the Apple emojis look like. There's no contextual alternates feature in this icon set, or this emoji typeface I designed for this magazine. It's supposed to look kind of sketchy and hand-drawn, so there's actually variations of each one of the glyphs, so when you type them in a row, they swap out and make it feel more like it was drawn by hand and it's less like a font. And the reason I made it a font instead of just a series of images was because it was for this secrets-themed issue, and it let the designers of the magazine, Pam Runis, the art director I worked with, use it and encode secret messages with it without having to do that manually. So it was used on things like the social media campaign. And I wasn't going to put this example in, but then I was like, oh, right, developers like stickers, so it's on stickers. Postcards, and then people can go to the website and decode those secret messages. Before you ask, yes, I am currently available for cryptography work. A more practical example of this idea was done earlier this year by Kimya Gandhi. She wrote a really great article for alphabets.org, a blog I highly recommend you check out. This is a Devanagari typeface she did with many contextual alternates. The challenges of doing this in this language aren't one that I'm personally familiar with, but I'm excited about other designers, type designers, linguists, web developers, talking about what it means to bring those things to the web. The language-specific considerations that are available in typefaces vary, but there are features that help with that sort of thing. For example, in Dutch, the IJ can be treated as one glyph instead of two, so that this typeface by the Type Foundry Underwear has a variation for that. Sometimes you also get to work with people who are experts in their field, so I got to work with Mariko Takagi for a project for Google Fonts early access Japanese typefaces, and the specimens we designed, she really coached me through what it meant to deal with some Japanese typography-specific issues. And you're particularly lucky here in Singapore because there's a really great series called Letter Love, organized by Relay Room. There was an event last night, a talk about designing bilingual, multilingual typefaces. And if you're interested in typography, I highly recommend you go check out this event series. It runs every quarter. And another feature I wanted to talk about is stylistic alternates. So this one's abbreviated as SALT. This is the same typeface lavanderia that we were looking at in one of the other examples. And so is this. By using some different stylistic alternates, you can get a pretty different feeling from the typeface. And this might be an interesting way if you're already using a set of typefaces for a company you're working for or something like that, where it might actually be more versatile than you realized. Sometimes there's just a few key glyphs in a typeface that really define its character, and by having those swapped out, you can get a different feeling. And I worked on the web-based type tester for the Lost Type Co-op a couple years ago, where we tried to highlight these features in line for people. So as you're trying things out on the website, as you're trying out the typefaces, those features are all highlighted for you. And this is where the font feature settings property comes into play a bit more. Here we're setting contextual alternates and stylistic alternates. So this is an idea of chaining together multiple open type features. Case-sensitive forms are another category, abbreviated as CASE. It's particularly, I think it's becoming more and more applicable because we keep using glyphs in ways that maybe they weren't used that way before. So the @ symbol is one of those. If you're setting handles and usernames with an @ and you set it in all caps, now that @ symbol kind of looks too small or like it's sitting too low compared to the all caps letters. So there are open type features in some typefaces that will correct that issue. So you have a version that's specifically for sitting alongside the all caps settings. And you can use that with case. An extension of that is small capitals. Small capitals are specifically designed to sit along the lowercase letters. And these can sort of highlight things for our readers, like acronyms within a paragraph of text. If you have an all caps word in the middle of a paragraph, sometimes it might draw a reader's attention away when we don't want to do that. So small caps are designed specifically to sit alongside the lowercase letters. They can still show someone that something is an acronym, but they stick out less in a paragraph. That said, no small caps is better than faux or fake small caps. Sometimes people will just scale down the uppercase letters to the height of the lowercase letters with the intent of making them look like small caps, which is sort of in an attempt to mimic book typography. But what this ends up doing is actually making the small caps letters more distracting because they feel much lighter or they feel skewed in some way. So this is a great example that shows that by Matthew Butterick from his book Practical Typography, which I highly recommend. You can see the fake small caps feel much lighter compared to the capital letters, where the real ones feel like they're properly designed to sit alongside them. So don't use the old font variant small caps feature that creates fake small caps. The new property you're looking for is font variant caps, small caps. This is all documented on that utility OpenType site as well. So I used that on the Surge pricing page for the acronyms as an example. And you might say, hey, that's pretty annoying to go through and wrap all those acronyms in span tags. But there's actually a lot of tools that will do that for you, like typography.js and Node. And there's a version in Ruby and for WordPress and a lot of other things. So you can continue writing your content or letting your clients write your content and have some of these spans applied to your markup for you. Another category, there's other categories specifically for numbers, since we've mostly been talking about Latin letters so far. Old style and lining numbers. Lining numbers typically are the default in sans serif typefaces, and they are designed to sit alongside the uppercase letters. Old style numbers are designed to sit alongside the lowercase letters, and they tend to be the default in serif typefaces. A good way to remember that is The top one here is Verdana, and the bottom is Georgia. So in Verdana, the lining numbers are the default, and in Georgia, the old style are the default. Both designed by Matthew Carter, but in that case, you know that those features are potentially available for you in the typefaces, even when the default is different. Proportional and tabular numbers help us align numbers vertically rather than horizontally. So if we're setting a whole table of information, it's really annoying when things don't line up properly. This makes it difficult for our readers to scan for information. Tabular numbers are essentially monospaced numbers that are designed to fit in with your typeface. So I see some people sometimes switch to just a monospaced font for their tables, but this way things are preserved horizontally and vertically. And if you're already loading in a web font with tabular numbers, you might as well use them. It also applies in animation and user interface design. When the frames are stacked, rather than having the numbers jump around, they can all stay in place. This was really bugging me on the plane. If you're on the plane next to me, I guess you can have the window seat. Apparently, I'm going to be thinking about proportional versus tabular numbers. Here's a proper execution of it at a different airport where things are lined up. So you can use that with font variant numeric tabular nums. And it's important to remember not all typefaces have all these features. You want to choose a typeface that has the feature, load the web font, and then enable the features. Typefaces are different. This is Morriston designed by Riley Cran. I've set the schedule here in this typeface, and I can switch to the tabular numbers. But if I switch to this typeface Escafina, also designed by Riley Cran, that option isn't available. That's really because this is a ridiculous way to set this table. This is a typeface intended for large display settings. It looks beautiful like this, but I wouldn't want to set a whole spreadsheet in that typeface. So OpenType features can actually be a really good way to help you figure out what your typeface is good for. When you're evaluating typefaces, I know that can be a challenging task sometimes, but these features show you that, oh, this is good for setting large tables of information, or this has a bunch of swashes, which means it's probably more for display settings. If you're using a web font service, you just have to make sure that you are including these features when you're loading your web fonts, or if you're self-hosting web fonts, just don't subset them out. There tends to be documentation for all of this based on whatever web font service you're using, and it's usually as simple as ticking one box, but it differs slightly between each one, but I'll link to those pages on my website. And then lastly, you want to enable the tabular numbers in your CSS. So again, you can use this library if you want, which means then you would just have to apply the tnum class to your table, and then the small caps class to the abbreviation here. This is all documented with lots of examples on the site, but I think it was more important to go through some examples of how this worked within typefaces rather than get too deep into the specifics of the CSS, since it's really just the names of the features. What's more interesting is what features these fonts actually have. Developers have frequently demystified their craft for me, including some of the incredible people you're going to see speaking here later throughout the day, including some people who helped make FontFace a reality and someone who wrote an amazing syntax highlighting library. So I appreciate you having me here to geek out about some specific typographic details with you. I hope you can see that typography can be demystified too. Yes, you need to develop your eye, and that takes time, but you can also research and get excited about the advanced typographic features already included within the fonts to help you. You also know more about typography than you give yourself credit for directly through your familiarity with principles in syntax highlighting, these typographic conventions in code. And because of this, when you design for readers, I'm sure you'll syntax highlight everything. Thanks. Oh, sure.
Hello. Thank you so much, Kenneth. I think that's a very insightful information on typefaces, and I have like a little bit of slight envy looking at your slide designs. So is there anyone who's interested in, we're going to take a few questions, so any of you has questions for Kenneth, please raise up your hand. Zell will give you the mic. Any questions? Come on.
Questions, anyone?
Okay, I'm going to ask you questions.
Thanks.
So I'm curious about, as someone who's interested in typography, but I only know one source, which is Google Web Font. I was wondering, where do you get like your resources when it comes to web fonts, other than Google Web Font, and where did you get your inspiration?
I work with the Lost Type Co-op a lot, and we have a lot of typefaces that you should check out. So that's losttype.com. And Typotech, I mentioned Peter Bielak's typeface, Greta Sands. They have an amazing catalog. WebType is one. But I think the best advice I really could offer you is to check out that Letter Love series that's based here in Singapore. It's run by an amazing type designer who studied in the Netherlands and came back to Singapore and puts on these great events. So if you're interested in type, you should check that out, and you'll find people recommending you a lot of new things there as well.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience?
Hi. I actually have a question about the OTF font format, because a lot of the things that you talked about, like ligatures and swatches, are part of the OTF font. So how is browser support for this? Because normally when I declare font faces, you have like all the fallbacks. You have your WOF2, WOFs. So like, how safe is it to just declare an OTF font?
Browser support is great, actually. You brought up an important point. These are called OpenType features, but they're not exclusive to the OpenType font format. WOF and WOF2 both include OpenType features. And since Safari 10 came out, all the major browsers support all the font feature, or the majority of the font feature settings, certainly for Latin-based languages. It gets a bit different for other languages, but you can also check out stateofwebtype.com, which is like the can I use for these features, basically. But yeah, you don't need to use OpenType font formats. This will all work with WOF and WOF2 as well. Thanks. Great.
Any
Thanks for
more
having
questions
me.
from the audience?
Great.
Hi.
Well, if you want to talk type, find me.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Can we
Hello.
take one last one?
Yeah, sure.
Hi. First, thank you so much. And second, this is really cool just because I didn't know about OpenType features. So the question I had was, one of the first examples you had, you said that you can set font variant ligatures, but then the higher class way was the font feature settings, and then you went into about support, and I think I missed the part where you were explaining why this is important, or else what would blow up if I don't do it.
Okay. It's not really, the browser support for font feature settings is very good, and if you just want to use font feature settings, that's totally fine, and that will probably work for most cases. If you are using a lot of OpenType features in different ways, those things won't cascade down the document. So if you set certain OpenType features on the body, you're going to have to redeclare all of those on the heading. So in the case of me writing a library to help people with that, I needed to avoid that issue. But in most situations, you can just use font feature settings and know it'll have good browser support. Okay, thanks.